Hunted, written by LgFatherAnthrocite. Koenig had been a solo scout for nearly 3 cycles. In that time, he had mapped 20 systems and marked no less than 3 habitable worlds. It was hard enough to be a solo scout, and even tougher to be successful at it. The training alone took years, and being at the vanguard of Zil expansion efforts meant that he had little to go on other than astronomical data that showed where the star systems were located. His job was to fly in, map the planets, marking any that were useful, such as gas giants and metal-rich planets and asteroid belts. Occasionally, a habitable planet was mapped, and a colony scout ship was sent to determine viability for colonization. Koenig was closing in on a particularly promising habitable planet. If it turned out to be the 4th one, Koenig would go down as one of the best solo scouts of all time. He brought his vessel into orbit around the 4th planet of the system and was preparing to release recon drones when he heard an alarm. Running from the tech bay to the bridge took 4 minutes. The ship was compact, needing only basic functionality and minimal space for crew. There were 4 rooms: the bridge, the tech bay, and at the rear a sleeping berth with hygiene facilities attached and a small galley-slash gym. Storage and engine access were through the small ducts in the ship, but they were rarely accessed. He read the display, slamming the button to disable the alarm. Incoming objects at high velocity. He looked out the window but saw nothing. He raised the deflector shields just in case. Moments later, he saw the deflector controls indicate contact. He looked out the port side viewport, but saw nothing. More indications of contact all along the front of the ship, and a drop in shield stability. He was confused. Nothing visible appeared to be hitting him, and yet his shield generators were being drained. Finally, he saw it, a small asteroid about the size of a balled-up hand. It hit the shields and drained a full 2% of power. Micro-asteroids were quickly standing away at his defenses. They were moving fast, and they were hard, probably magnesium and nickel. He had started maneuvering to a higher orbit when it happened. 2 big asteroids, about the size of a full-grown Zil, slammed into the shields in quick succession, dropping his defense shields. He was taking direct damage to the ship now. As long as he could move out of the debris path, he could get back to the nearest outpost for repairs. He was almost clear when the largest beast came into view, moving far too quickly for maneuvering thrusters to avoid. His ship was slammed with pieces of iron moving at thousands of miles a second. As a single cacophonous chorus, alarms started to blare out. Hull breach, atmo loss, fuel containment, and a dozen other systems reported damage. Koenig ran out of the bridge, stopping only long enough to hit the homing beacon and distress signal, and ran into the tech room. He grabbed his personal compact and a small toolkit, then ran to his sleeping quarters. To save space, the whole sleeping quarters was an escape pod. If there was an emergency, he could launch the unit, and his bed would act as a crash couch for re-entry. He slammed the big button on his way through the door, then flopped onto the bed and pulled the restraints from the edges around his thorax. Once the restraints were clipped together, the pod would auto-inject. Koenig hoped that there were no more large pieces of debris between his pod and the planet. Koenig woke with a start. He had made it into the atmosphere of the planet, no problem, but the surface was mostly jungle, and at the end there had been some pretty hard impacts with the trees. He unstrapped the restraints and rolled off the bed and he checked the small readouts next to the now sealed hatch. The air was breathable, but a little light on oxygen. The sun was up, but it was a yellow dwarf, different from the red dwarf in his home world system. The emergency supplies were secure, and if he could contact his ship remotely with his compact, he might be able to get a few drones to launch and map the immediate area. He spent several hours, still locked in the pod, attempting to make contact. Finally, after half a rotation on the planet, his compact connected. He launched all the drones he could. He earmarked 2 for his crash site, and sent the rest to complete the survey as planned. No reason he couldn't claim the find after they rescued him. He set the ship's emergency beacon to include a message regarding the low-orbit microasteroids, so the rescue ship would not also fall prey to it. Until they got you, he was essentially on leave. He went back to the bed and lay down, waiting for the drones to report back to him with the maps and initial diagnostic information on the planet. Koenig woke at the sound of the notification on his compad. The drones had mapped out the surrounding area. There was a relatively close lake that contained fresh water, and numerous game trails led through the dense undergrowth towards the water source. As long as he was back by sundown, he should be relatively safe. The drones noted that there were several large creatures in the area, but they were not designated to do biological survey duties. Only note the sufficiently large creatures. He set the drones to complete their original survey areas. Koenig noted that the gravity on this planet was a little higher than he was used to, so he made sure to load extra water into his bag, as well as a small toolkit. He also retrieved a small sidearm from the survival supplies, checking the battery and stowing it safely in his harness. After that, he retrieved a large canister that contained the water purification unit. He made sure to locate the pod on the compad. When taking a cue from his aerial map, he set off for the nearest game trail that led to water, closing the pod before he left. He walked through some of the carnage of his landing. Great berms of land on either side of the trench his pod had dug while landing. The trench itself was filled with mangled vegetation. He noticed a distinct lack of noise around his pod, but the steamy wind carried the clicking, hooting, chirping, and cawing of untold life. Koenig could barely see. Everything was so hot it sort of blended together. It would take his eyes ages to acclimate to this heat. He walked carefully, not wanting to trip over any of the underbrush or fallen foliage. After about 30 minutes, he was able to see a little more clearly, his eyes finally getting used to the intense heat signatures. The treetops were bright red now, clearly the hottest parts of the jungle. The lower his gaze, the darker the foliage appeared. There were a few bright spots low on the ground, and so, assuming that they were creatures, Koenig gave them a healthy berth, not wanting to incite an incident against a possibly toxic / poisonous / hungry / hurt animal. A few minutes after his vision finally started to normalize, he came to the edge of the game trail. He took a sighting from his compad and started towards the lake. Another 10 minutes saw him at its edge. He held the small sidearm ready, as predators in the water, or he had to drink it, might be in danger. After scouting for a minute, he found a small unoccupied inlet and set the water container up. The small hose would siphon up the water and run it through a chemical and ultraviolet filter before depositing it in the main chamber. This would take several minutes to finish, so Koenig set about examining some of the plant life, being sure to keep an eye out for anything getting too close. After finding something that resembled a cross between two of the native fruits on his homeworld, he was disappointed to see that it was inedible according to his quick analysis. He cleaned the small ad on his compad that let it do quick chemical analysis, and then went to check the water jug. He stood waiting for a few millicycles while it finished filling itself. He purged the pump and filter systems, then checked water for anything life-threatening. All clear. He would not die of dehydration, and food would be easily rationed to last for at least several deca rotations, if not more. He would start hunting in earnest for food tomorrow. For now, he would head back to the pod and wait out the night. Koenig was reading, his compad containing the library's worth of books. Boredom was something a solo scout contended with constantly, so Koenig was sure to download any and all new books whenever he made a pit stop at a station. Outside, the sound slowly changed from loud cacophony to more subdued noises, as day gave way to night. Tired from the high gravity and the strenuous hauling of water, compounded by the stress of the crash, Koenig curled up and slept. Shortly before dawn on the jungle world, Koenig awoke. He felt as if the pod were moving slightly. Suddenly, it canted over, nearly tipping. Koenig jumped up and grabbed his backpack and compad, slung on his harness and ready to leave the pod. There was a loud metallic shearing noise, and the pod tipped around again. Once it stopped moving, Koenig cycled the hatch, and running on all fours, ran into the underbrush. It was undignified, but so was dying, and he would rather be called names than mourned. Koenig was better able to see now that the super-hot sun of this world was beyond the horizon. He was easily able to scramble through the small clearing around the pod and make it to some undergrowth. He continued to run for several moments, being sure to change direction every few steps to evade anything that might be following him. After several of the larger tree trunks zipped through his line of sight, he spotted a hollow in the roots of a giant specimen. He skidded into a hollow, and using an old and rarely required skill of his people, he matched his skin temperature to the tree, fading from view. He stood stock still, staring into the foliage, looking for any sign of movement. He could see the tips of the trees on the horizon, starting to glow more and more red as the dawn crept closer and the yellow sun started to warm the treetops. Something moved. He could see the torch in the darkness, stalking through the undergrowth. It stopped and sniffed, turning towards Carnegie. It faced him, even though he should have been completely hidden. It stared right at him. Carnegie's feral instincts made him lock all of his musculature rock tight, not even allowing him to point his sidearm at the giant beast meters away from him. He could barely breathe as it slowly stalked closer and closer, until finally just feet away, its jaws opened slowly. A guttural growl came from deep in the creature's chest, and Carnegie looked down the toothy purple throat of death. The creature's head exploded in a red mist of blood and bone, covering Carnegie in a fine spray of brain, blood, and shock. He stood staring at the carcass of the beast, his circulatory system sounding like drums in his ears. Several moments later, a section of the forest stood up and walked over to him. He continued to be frozen in place until, at last, Galactic Standard caressed his auditory nerves long enough to wake his brain out of the terror lock it was in. Carnegie looked confusedly at the forest that moved in front of him. "I'm fine, just scared is all," he replied to the creature's repeated inquiry as to his health. After cleaning himself up, Carnegie retrieving what he could from the mauled pod with the help of his rescuer, a human named Tommy Jones, at his secured base camp. Apparently, Tommy was also stranded on the planet, having fallen prey to the same micro-asteroids. He had been trapped here for months, and was able to survive because it was a human special forces unit. He had done something called a ghillie suit that enabled him to hide in the jungle by looking like a lump of vegetation. He explained to Carnegie that he had seen the pod approaching and had gone to see if there were survivors. He had arrived in time to see Carnegie making his escape from the pond, and was able to kill the monster. He called it a direwolf, some sort of creature from the lore in his homeworld the beast resembles. Carnegie asked him why his camouflage technique of matching his body and ambient temperature didn't work. He said the beast used visible light to see, not body temperature. Zill camouflage was completely ineffective against the creature's eyes. Tommy said it was probably something to do with the star of the system. It was similar to his homeworld star, and he could also see Carnegie perfectly in the tree root hollow. He only noticed the camouflage technique when he sighted a direwolf with the advanced optics of his rifle, and noticed that Carnegie did not register as a heat source. Several weeks later, they were both rescued by Zill military. Carnegie made history as a solo scout for finding the fourth habitable world, and for being one of the few Zill who had survived a Class 11 Deathworld without advanced equipment. He strongly attests that this is due to his lifelong friend, Tommy Jones, one of the trillions of humans who had survived on many Deathworlds. Tommy, Carnegie claimed in his memoirs, was one of the strongest, bravest, and toughest Sophons Carnegie had ever met, despite being from a completely different race. He invited Carnegie to his marital ceremony, and had him participate in best man honor amongst the packmates. In return, when Carnegie became a master scout, it was Tommy Jones who affixed the medal to Carnegie's dress harness. The two would continue to communicate regularly for the rest of their days. When Tommy Jones died of old age, Carnegie, himself an elder of his people, had the name Tommy Jones added to the register of Carnegie's lineage. Along with the epitaph, "We could never see the universe with the same eyes, but we saw each other as friends, and that is all there is to see." End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.